Hello and welcome. Today we're going to tackle a subject that has undergone a truly revolutionary transformation in Indian law, the property rights of a Hindu female. We'll be tracing the incredible journey from age-old concepts like Stridhan all the way to the modern legal framework laid out by the Hindu Succession Act of 1956.
So, here's our game plan. We've broken down our analysis into 6 main parts. We'll kick things off with the historical background, then we'll get into the real game changer, Section 14. From there, we'll unravel the rules of succession, look at the daughter's rights, review some critical court cases, and wrap it all up with a quick revision to get you ready for any exams.
To really understand just how massive the 1956 Act was, we have to go back in time. So let's start with Section 1 and explore what the world of property rights for a Hindu woman looked like before this legislation turned everything on its head.
Okay, so imagine a woman's property was sorted into 2 completely different categories. First, you had Stridhan. This was property she absolutely owned. She could sell it, gift it, do whatever she wanted, and it would pass to her own heirs. But then, you had the limited estate. Here, she was really more of a temporary caretaker than a true owner. Her powers were heavily restricted, and when she passed away, the property didn't go to her heirs, it went back to the original male owner's family line, to people called Reversioners.
Now, even before the big changes in '56, people knew things needed to evolve. The 1937 Act, for example, was a big step. It gave widows a share equal to a son's share. But here was the catch. It was still just a limited interest. So while it was progress, it wasn't equality. It was like being given a seat at the table, but not being allowed to decide what's for dinner.
And that brings us to the single most important provision in this entire story, Section 14 of the Hindu Succession Act. Honestly, you can think of this as the Charter of Liberty for Hindu women's property rights. It was one powerful section that completely redrew the map.
So, what did Section 14 actually do? Well, it was beautifully simple. It took those 2 separate types of property we just talked about, and it made them one. It declared that any property a Hindu woman possessed was hers absolutely, as a full owner. Just like that, the old concepts of Stridhan and limited estate were gone.
Now, the lawyers in the room might be asking, what exactly does possessed by mean? That's a great question. The Supreme Court answered it in the case of Mangal Singh versus SMT Ratno. They said it's not just about physically having the property, it also includes constructive possession, things like collecting rent from it, or even just having the legal right to get the property back. This wide interpretation was absolutely key to making Section 14 as powerful as it is.
And make no mistake, this law is still evolving. Just recently, in a 2024 case, the Supreme Court doubled down on this idea. They confirmed that if a woman receives property because of a pre-existing right, like her right to maintenance, that property becomes hers, absolutely. It's not a temporary gift, it's a full transfer of ownership.
And remember those reversioners we talked about? The male relatives waiting in the wings? Well, a 2022 Supreme Court ruling made it official. That concept is obsolete. If a woman inherits property after 1956, it's hers, period. Any potential claims from distant male relatives of the previous owner are completely extinguished.
Okay, so we've firmly established that a Hindu woman is the absolute owner of her property. But that leads to the next logical question. What happens to that property when she dies without leaving a will? That's what we're going to dig into now, in Section 3, as we look at the rules of succession.
The law sets up a very clear hierarchy, almost like a waterfall. The property first flows to entry I, her children and her husband. If there's no one there, it flows down to entry 2, the husband's heirs. If that's empty, it continues down to her mother and father, then her father's heirs, and finally her mother's heirs. The crucial rule here is that if anyone in a higher entry exists, the property stops there. It doesn't go any further down the list.
But what happens in the specific and quite common scenario where a woman passes away without any children? Does the property just follow that same waterfall path? Well, this is where the law has a fascinating exception.
This is where we see something unique in Hindu succession law. It actually cares about where the property came from. If a childless woman dies, the law looks at the source. If she inherited property from her own parents, that specific property goes back to her father's side of the family. And if she inherited it from her husband or father-in-law, it goes back to her husband's family. It's a legal mechanism designed to ensure property stays within the family it originated from.
Now, this source-based rule has become pretty controversial. In fact, the Supreme Court itself has commented on it.
A judge recently called it potentially discriminatory, especially when a woman's own self-acquired property could go to her husband's distant relatives instead of her own parents. The court didn't strike down the law, but it gave some very strong advice. It urged Hindu women to write a will to ensure their property goes exactly where they want it to.
All right, let's shift gears to what is arguably one of the most significant changes in modern Hindu law, the daughter's right as a coparcener. This wasn't just a minor legal tweak, it was a fundamental move toward gender equality in ancestral family property.
You can really see the story of progress on this timeline. A daughter went from being completely excluded from inheriting ancestral property to becoming a top-tier heir for separate property, to finally, with the 2005 amendment, being named a coparcenary by birth with the exact same rights and liabilities as a son. And a 2020 Vinita Sharma case cemented that right, making it absolute and retroactive. It's been a long road to equality.
Of course, laws written in a book are one thing. It's in the courtroom where they are truly tested and defined. So in this section, let's look at a few of the landmark Supreme Court judgments that have really shaped our understanding of these property laws.
We just mentioned it, but the Vinita Sharma case deserves a closer look. The Supreme Court's ruling was profound. It said a daughter's right as a coparcenary is an unobstructed heritage. That means she gets it simply by being born. It's not a gift, it's a birthright. And it doesn't matter if her father was alive when the law changed in 2005. Her right is absolute.
Then, in 2022, the Arunachala Gounder case cleared up another major issue. The court ruled that when it comes to a father's self-acquired property, his daughter's right is paramount. Her claim comes before the claims of his brothers or nephews. This strengthened the daughter's position even further.
And in a very important ruling from 2023, the Supreme Court addressed the rights of children born from void or voidable marriages. In a move towards greater social justice, the court held that these children are indeed entitled to a share of their parents' ancestral property. It ensures they aren't unfairly penalized for the legal status of their parents' marriage.
We've gone through a lot of complex history in law, so let's bring it all home with a quick revision. This is the section you'll want to remember for exams, or just have a clear summary of where things stand today.
So let's boil it all down. What's the status today? A daughter is a coparcener by birth, just like a son, thanks to Section 6 and the Vinita Sharma case. A woman is an absolute owner of her property because Section 14 abolished the limited estate. That means she has full power to sell or gift it. Children from void or voidable marriages now have a right to inherit a share, thanks to the Reversioners case. And finally, the succession rules in Section 15 are still being looked at by the courts.
When you step back and look at the big picture, the evolution here is undeniable. The entire legal framework has shifted from a position of female dependency to one of property equality. It's a powerful story about the modernization of personal law in India.
And that leaves us with one final, big question to think about. With the judiciary itself questioning parts of the law, is the next logical step a full legislative amendment? Is a completely gender-neutral succession law the final piece of the puzzle in this long journey towards equality? That's something for all of us to consider.